close enough to 6 o'clock. We're going to start our meeting with a roll call.
Commissioner Patton.
Here.
Commissioner Barwick.
Here.
Commissioner Webb.
Here.
Commissioner Steckland.
Here.
Mayor Absher.
Here, if you would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Okay, in just a moment, I'm going to come down to this podium if you can't tell how this is configured in here, so bear with me until we get to that point. This is a special meeting tonight that is essentially for the sole purpose of me discussing primarily with the commissioners this proposed plan that we put together based on the items that they wanted to tackle over the next 12 to 18 months and that I've been working on how we would actually be able to pay for that and implement that along with some other things. That being said, and I'll explain a little bit how I plan on integrating the public comment on that part of it as we go along. So other than talking about this, which we're here tonight for, we do have a section on our agenda for public comments, audience to visitors. That's the portion of a public meeting that we always invite people to speak to the council, up to 5 minutes, subject to, it's got its whole own ordinance that governs that portion of our meeting. But if anybody would like to speak to the council on something else other than this plan, now would be the opportunity to do that. That being said, for the purposes of time and efficiency, if you have something that would be better discussed with the council outside of this meeting, you'll have another opportunity to do that this coming Monday on the 9th, which is our regular meeting. So I'm not trying to talk anybody out of not coming and speaking to the council. But if you're going to do that, it needs to be on something other than what we're here for tonight, if you wouldn't mind, because you'll have plenty of opportunity to speak to it as we go along through the evening. So all that being said, is there someone that would like to speak to the council regarding anything other than this agenda item of the 2020 proposal? Okay. Here we go. How's everybody tonight?
Very good.
Okay. Nothing like talking about taxes to get people to attend the city council. My plan for tonight is going to be different than any other city council meeting. Are you pointing to me to this? Yes. Can you not hear me if I'm talking out here? Cannot. Okay, I'll try to stay yoked to the podium. My plan for this meeting tonight, number one, is to, you got to understand the purpose of a city council meeting is for me to talk to them primarily. That being said, this is a little bit different because of all of you that are interested in this, and I'm glad to see that you're here. So I really don't know how this plays out. We've never done it this way before, so I'm going to play it a little bit by ear. So if you wouldn't mind, play it by ear with me. What I mean by that is I'm going to, at first, go through without reading this whole thing. Does everybody have one of these that wants one? Does anybody need one? Okay. There's 10 pages of this, and one of my pet peeves in meeting is death by PowerPoint and having somebody read to me verbatim what it says on a piece of paper that they've already been given. So I'm not going to do that. But I am going to go over the high points of this. I want you to understand where this came from, what the math is, what the truth is, the stuff that's been said to me today and prior today and probably to the other commissioners that has no basis in the truth that I need to dispel, and then answer any other questions that you've got about it. This is a proposal. We will not be voting on it tonight. I don't know when we will be voting on it. It will have to be, for it to be enacted, the sales tax component of it would have to be in September at one of the two meetings, either the 9th or the 23rd. This meeting isn't about making decisions. It's about talking with one another about it as open as we can, and frankly, talking with each of you about it so that you can understand it. Does that sound fair? So if you have something to say, I may be talking this way, I may be talking to you guys, I'm not really sure, I've not done this before. My intent is not to sell you on this proposal. My intent is just to walk you through what they wanted to accomplish, including what I wanted to accomplish, but how we could get there mathematically and how we can get there strategically. So that's my only goal. I'm not here to sell you. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. I'm not a politician. I'm not here to spin this. I'm here to tell you what my thinking is. And I'm sure some of you are here to tell me where my thinking's wrong, and that's okay. Fair enough? Any questions? So if you have something to say, just raise your hand. I hate to do it that way, but just raise your hand. And I may defer your question if I think I'm going to get there, but we'll just play this by ear. On the 28th of May, after I'd been in office, and these gentlemen had been in office for about a month, I had asked them prior to the 28th of May, but on that council meeting, I had asked them to set basically our agenda. What is it that we want to accomplish for the city of Marion? Would you guys like to come up here and sit?
Okay.
You sure? Man, it's hard for me looking at you over here, but okay. They talked about, we set 5 agenda items. They're listed on page 1, and I know I said I wouldn't read it, but this is important. I am going to read these 5 strategic goals. 1 is city-wide revitalization to focus on the beautification of our town. That's a big word. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Signage and branding to better present ourselves to those that visit us. I talked a lot in my campaign specifically about this issue. I'm glad that you guys thought it was important too. We are going to have to start looking at our town through the eyes of those that visit us. I call it visitor glasses. I don't want to beat this to death, but folks, we have a lot of work to do. And it's not going to be cheap, and it doesn't come free. Item number 2, we have got to answer what happens when these TIF districts expire. Now, I'm not going to be up here tonight praising or talking bad about TIFs. I'm just going to talk about the facts. The facts are, is our largest TIF, namely TIF 1. Funny how that works. TIF 1 pretty much is everything around the interstate. If you think what used to be the cloverleaf, I don't know what we call that now, but I call it the cloverleaf. Everything that's in the cloverleaf, and then along 13. There's some outliers to that, but everybody talks about the cross in Marion. That's our economic center, if you will. It's turned out to be the economic center, I think most people would agree, of Southern Illinois. Mayor Butler had a vision for how to use TIF. TIFs are difficult to understand. It's even difficult for me to explain, although I think I could. But here's the thing, TIFs are not hard to see. Everything that you see at Kokopelli, that you see that's developed, when we were in high school, what used to be, I see my brother's back here, what is now Absher Arnold, there was a furniture store and then a liquor store, I think, there, that's now torn down. It was Blue Cross Blue Shield. That was the furthest west that you could possibly go in Marion, and there was nothing between the McDonald's on Halfway Road and that street. So if you can take yourself back 35 years and think now what's all there, that's TIF. So when you need to explain it to yourself or somebody else, that's what TIF did. All the TIFs did, not just one TIF. Here's the stark reality. That TIF that has propelled the vast majority of the growth, whether you like it or whether you don't, and there are those that like it and there's those that don't. That's not what I'm here to debate. The fact is it's expiring. If you'll notice and you read in the newspapers, lots of towns are just now getting on the TIF bandwagon. They're just now starting some of their own TIFs. These things last for 23 years, and they can be extended another 12 with the state legislature's approval. Our TIF 1 has been extended. When it's 35 years old, I think in 3 years, am I right, Steve? 2022, 23 is the tax year, the last tax year. It's gone. That represents over half of the growth that TIF captures of all the TIFs combined, and we have 12 or something like that that are active. It is the driver. It's expiring. If we do not do something now, we will be scrambling to do something later. So whether you like this plan or don't like this plan contemplates taking $1 million and setting it back every tax year and investing it and doing some things that honestly have been taken away from us. One of them is a revolving loan fund. It's been a very important driver for certain sizes of businesses that have come to town. The state of Illinois, I think, Glenn, a year ago or about a year ago is when they ended. That was all state money to begin with. We grew it over time with interest payments. That's what you're supposed to do, is it worked and you get interest back. The state took that money back from all municipalities, and it's hurt. We've how many times have we said, man, I wish we had that revolving loan fund. We are, whether you like this plan or whether you don't, the city of Marion has got to answer and start answering right now. What are we going to do from an economic incentive standpoint when these TIFs expire? Because this first TIF expires in a couple years, but then they start rapidly falling off in very short order. In 6 or 7 years, almost all of them will be done. We can't pass them again. It's over. While all these towns that are just now starting them and getting them on that bandwagon, I do say this, thank God, Mayor Butler saw around the corners that he did, because what you see is what we got from it, and it worked. We have to figure out what's next. So this item number 2 is trying to answer what's after TIF. Item number 3, very big one in my heart, although not the most expensive one, so to speak, on this plan, but not a free one, is the council wants to place uniformed and sworn police officers in the remaining 6 school buildings in our district. For those of you who will recall, this time last year, we had worked out a deal with the school district and placed our first SRO, school resource officer, at the high school. The only reason that we started at the high school was, I hate to even talk about things like this publicly. I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but it's simply where we thought the biggest threat might be. That is not to say that other schools in the district are not threatened. And I don't mean that we have active threats. I'm just saying you don't have to go any further than your TV at 5:30 at night to figure out what's going on in our country. Council thought that was a very important plan. We have developed an outline of how we can get there. We're moving forward with that. The school district, not by increasing any of your taxes, by the way, has agreed to pay for the vast majority of the personnel costs for those police officers. That's the actual pay and benefits that will go to those officers. However, we're talking about managing basically a squad, for lack of another term, of 7 police officers. This is going to require not only uniforms, armor, gear, weaponry, the other accoutrements that go with being a police officer, but it also is going to require some supervision. We should not be fooled by the fact that we can't, you just don't turn 7 officers loose with no supervision. So it's going to take some investment on the city's part to pay for those things. That's item number 3. Item number 4 is code enforcement reform. This is another big item that's a little bit perplexing to me, being the new guy. I'm just going to put it really simply, as simply as I know how. And this is a complicated subject. It's complicated in this way. There is a very fine line in my mind, and I've struggled to find it, if I'm just going to be honest. There's a very fine line between having the heavy hand of government tell people what they can and can't do on their property versus private ownership rights. I've described it as the line is such that we have to fly a helicopter, land one skid on that line, and hover there forever. That's what it feels like. The wind blows, the helicopter moves, things change. And I'm not just talking about grass height. And trust me, that's the number 1 phone call this guy gets sitting 2 doors down. Either mad because they were told their grass is too high, or as often, someone else wasn't told their grass was too high, and somebody's upset about that. This is a difficult subject. Here's the fact of the matter. The people that are in Marion that vote elect a body of people that decide the standards of which we agree to live by. That can be grass height. It can be garbage in people's yards. It could be how aggressive we treat a drug problem. It's not just code enforcement. What do we envision for our town? What collectively do we want to live with? The other thing that I have come to the stark realization, it's hard to believe, but was elected 5 months yesterday. I can't hardly believe that that much time has passed. So it's not taken me that long, but it's taken a while to figure some of this out. I honestly thought, guys, when I was elected, and I think a couple of you that were new to the council probably thought the same thing. We really thought it was our laws, our ordinances that were weak, that we just didn't have the ordinances that we need, because that's what I heard over and over. That's only partially true. The truth is we've got a lot of ordinances. We don't have a lot of resources to enforce them. We have 3 people in the code enforcement department. This creates a lot of confusion. I've had people tell me that people in water department and street department trucks are code enforcement. That's not the truth. There's 3, and one of them stays here. It's Kathy, and she's, raise your hand, Kathy, take some of the heat off me. She runs the office, and we've got 2 people that are out that are responsible. There's approximately 9,000 households in Marion. There's about 212 miles of streets, if I remember that number right. So there's a third of those houses are non-owner occupied homes, rental homes, for lack of a better term. There's a different set of rules for rental property and standards that need to be adhered to for safety and for welfare in that than we necessarily enforce upon owner occupied. There's commercial inspections that have to be done and inspected not only for safety and fire issues, but for structural integrity as well as the residential side. So it's actually a really, really complicated set of things that has to be monitored and enforced. And the long and the short of it is we've got Kathy in the office and we got 2 people to enforce all of that. It's far more work than 2 or 3 people can possibly do in a growing town. Far more. So a small part of this budget has to do with dedicating additional resources, money, your money, in order to beef those resources up. And it's not just people. We don't have the software that's necessary or the processes that are necessary in order to enforce the laws we already have on the books. Now, are there some laws that need to be addressed and redone? Yes, there's some reform that needs to be done there. But this I submit to you guys on the council, and I will never back down off of this. We shouldn't pass anything that we don't intend to enforce. There shouldn't be any law on the books that we're not willing to enforce. Right now, we are neither willing, in some cases, we're certainly not able. We just don't have what it takes to enforce the laws. And I'm just against it. I'm the guy that leans more that we shouldn't be that heavy hand of government guy, but if we're going to go there, we need to enforce the law. Because honestly, when I get the phone calls, that's actually what I'm supposed to be in charge of. Part of my commissionership, if you will, among some others, is code enforcement. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not, whether I like that particular law. That should not enter my calculus. It's what does it say? Are we abiding by that for everyone? And therein lies the problem, is that if somebody doesn't get their little thing in their yard that says they got to mow and somebody else did, then somebody feels like they're treated unfairly. I can't really disagree. But here's the reality. I don't have somebody to look at 8,000 yards every day. And they grow every day. How about that? By the time we get all the way around, they're high again. So one of the things I'm going to recommend when we get to reform, I think we need to go to self-reporting on that kind of stuff. If you got a problem with your neighbor's yard, then call it in. Otherwise, I don't know why we're paying somebody just to look at yards. If you don't have a problem with it in your neighborhood, maybe we shouldn't have a problem with it. Because maybe we can use that labor to address some much more important problems as the safety of some of these units. We'll debate that at some other time. I'm asking in this proposal, in order to enhance this code enforcement with a little bit of money. The last one is the biggest one, and this is what's causing the most consternation, I suspect, and the one that we'll spend probably the most of time talking about tonight. The hardest thing it's not hard to go, okay, we need $150,000 for school police officers. We need $150,000 to beef up code enforcement. The bigger question strategically, how do we position ourselves as a town as the place that you want to move your family and your jobs to? How do you do that? That's really subjective, isn't it? I might think it's the place. You might not think it's the place. How do we come up with something that makes us such a compelling argument that we can yell it loud and proud from the rooftops? What's the number one thing that I think the number one thing that causes consternation in this state relative to taxation? Somebody's got to know this answer. This is where you raise your hand or just yell it out. Starts with P and ends with taxes. Property taxes. So this is what embedded into my head. This is just my thought process. I told you I would walk you through my thought process. Because here's what I was trying to think. Okay, so we need, I think, about $400,000 in order to start honestly improving some things, beautification things. I think you've read in this, that's not intended in my proposal to be defined by the city council. I think we need to have a committee that works on that, on what those proposals are. But adding up that and just starting on some of these neglected structures to tear down. By the way, I had somebody mention to me during the course of this, you need to force the property owners to tear them down. I agree. Easier said than done. Because here's where the rubber meets the road. If they didn't have the means to keep the property up to where the property got to the point that it needs to be torn down, what's the realistic chances they're going to have the money to tear it down? 9 times out of 10, what happens is the city has to actually tear it down. And if you pay attention to any city council meetings and the legal bills, incidentally, that come along with this, you'll know what a big problem it is. So that's what we keep running into, is we pay to tear these things down. We have to foreclose on the property. Maybe we end up owning the property, maybe we don't. But it's easier adding up all those things than it is to figure out how do we become this compelling story. So back to the property taxes thing, as I added up these dollar amounts, what's the last thing that I really want to be the guy that goes out and says, I'm going to increase your property taxes to pay for this stuff? I think it does just the opposite in the argument of why people should move here and bring their families here and bring their jobs here. Now, so then I turned to sales taxes, because here's the reality of that. Not all, but most of the towns that are immediately around us, and I'm talking about Benton, West Frankfort, Carbondale, and Mount Vernon predominantly, are all much higher in sales taxes than we are. Now, does that necessarily mean that's our goal, to be as high as everybody else? Of course not. What it means is there's some room there. It means there's some room to increase without becoming uncompetitive. So I started looking at that, and here, you can only increase that rate a quarter point at a time. So that's the limitation. You have to go 1 quarter at a time. So I honestly looked at it and goes, well, how much would a quarter of a point do for us? And I thought, okay, well, this much of this could be done with that. And I had many conversations with many people, arguing back and forth about how much was too much, when we're just talking about a raise in the sales taxes to pay for these things. At some point, it occurred to me that we could still be cheaper than some of the towns around us, especially as I started doing some of the research, which is outlined in this book, relative to how much the average price of a home is and what that means for the average property taxes and how much the average household income is. And started actually doing the math. And if there's one thing that I ask, I'm sure I've been roasted all day on social media. Some of you have roasted me to my face, and that's okay. I've only got one request: do the math. Do it. If I'm all wet then roast me, and I deserve it. But if you do the math and you find out what the real math is behind some of these proposals, I think you will find it very attractive. What I finally came to the conclusion of is if we raised it by 3 increments, 3/4 points, 75 basis points, 3/4 of 1%, that takes us from 8.75 currently to 9.5. Not only could we pay for the things the council wants to do, but we could eliminate the property taxes that the city, just the city, levies on all property within the city. So that's residences and businesses. Now, in no way should you take that as though we're eliminating property taxes. That's not the case. The city, the only way I can explain this is I can only explain percentages and stuff backward looking, because I have no idea what everybody's going to levy as taxes next year. I can only look at it from the past. The simple math is that in 2017, which all this data is based on, which is the taxes you would have paid last year, if you had a property, any property, business or residence in Marion, the city's portion of that tax bill was right at 7.5%. That's the portion I'm talking about doing away with. On page 3 of this little booklet is some very specific math, and this is what I'm talking about that you need to pay attention to. Because this is the real thing. Don't depend on me to explain it to you. Don't spin or not spin. Look at it yourself. Here's how it works. The average home, according to the census data, in Marion is assessed at is worth $115,000. Property taxes at the 2017 payable 18 rate would have represented, if you look at the bottom, it's in the top and it's at the table at the bottom. That average home would have paid the city about can't find it now on my page. $220.07. That's in the second column of this page with all the little four columns of data at the bottom. If you've got a less expensive home, you can see what that math looks like. If you've got a more expensive home, you can see what that math looks like. The easy takeaway of this is as follows. That same average household, $115,000 house, has $46,000 worth of household income. That average income roughly spends somewhere in the 10% range in the city on consumables that would be subject to home rule tax. And now that I've brought that up, I've made myself a note. I need to highlight something. There is, today I got a phone call because I noted in here, I think on page 2, that not all, how does this affect you? No, it's actually, not all sales are subject to home rule tax, including medicine, groceries, and cars. Well, I already got a phone call today that says I'm a cheat because I have carved my businesses out of this. This is the Illinois state law. Home rule tax has never applied to those things, not since home rule tax became to be. So it's not something that I did. I've made copies of this also that's put on this front desk. All the categories of things that are not subject to home rule tax are listed on here. I don't know why cars are on there, to be honest with you. I can't explain that. Because oddly enough, in Chicago, that doesn't apply, like lots of other things. Did you know that in Chicago that the home rule applies to? I know that they assess it when you get home. They pay like 9 and 9.5% on cars up there too. I don't know why that is, except they make their own rules. I think the rest of it I do understand. Groceries that are meant to consume, not in the place you buy them. In other words, a grocery store. And medicines, insulin, needles, all those kind of medical appliance, prescription and non-prescription medicines. None of those things have ever paid the home rule tax. I presume that's because the people that are at the lowest end of the income spectrum, those items, groceries and medicine, predominantly make up they eat up a bunch of their income, right? So I think that's a protection in the law, frankly, for those that make the least amount of income, presuming that they're going to spend a whole lot more than the average person does on medicine and in food. So they don't apply tax to that. So that's what that's all about. I didn't make up those rules, so I just need to say my piece about that. It's funny all the things you get accused of being the mayor. But here's the long and the short of it. That same household, $115,000 house that pays $220 or did in 2017 in municipal tax will spend about 10% of that amount on the things that apply to home rule. So 10% of 46,000 is 4,600. That's 75 basis points, 0.75%, okay, will cost that household $34.50. That's the math. That's what we're talking about here. $34.50. If you don't like that math and you think, well, I make a whole lot more than that, then double it. Triple it. This is not the end of the world, and that's how it affects your specific pocketbook. I'm sure there's a circumstance out there where someone has a very, very modestly priced home, does not pay much in property tax, and buys a whole bunch of stuff. And maybe that relationship flips somewhere for somebody. We are talking about averages, and I guess that's all I know how to talk about, not every potential circumstance that's out there. Now, I think before I go on with this, I want to ask the council, with your permission, do you have questions or comments before I go on and zero in on any specific thing? What are your concerns? Now, some of you have shared those one-on-one with me in private. Any that you want to bring up here?
Mayor, the one question I had is on the police and fire pension. That's typically what we use that money for. So these new funds is still in consideration of paying for those benefit plans.
Everyone hear his question. So that every tax levy for a municipality is actually the sum of a bunch of line items, okay? Here's how ours went. My math right? Double check. $1,691,500 was for police and fire pensions. $140,000 was a recreational tax that we transferred to help operate the hub. The total is what the total tax levy was 1.831 million. So all I'm talking about is basically here. Let me go over this. I think this math is in there. 0.75% in sales tax. You keep in mind what Marion's strength is. From a business person's perspective and trying to come up with this, I was trying to consider what our strengths and our weaknesses were. Marion we're bumping up against, I think we'll probably exceed it this year. In the city limits, we sell $800 million worth of goods that are taxed. Not all of it's taxed at home rule, because all the cars and the boats and aircraft and all the different things and a lot of medicine and a lot of groceries. So not all of it is home rule. But $800 million worth of sales. By the time all that sales stuff factors out, 0.75% raises for the city 3.6 million. I'm rounding, but 3.6 million. What I'm proposing is giving it half of that amount back to the property owners by not levying a tax on their property. The remainder, it's actually a little bit less, the 1.7 million, which is detailed on the next to the last page, is how we would break that remaining money up. But to answer your question, yes, of that 3.6 that's made, we would be using some of that money to pay instead of the property taxes. It's paying it from sales taxes in lieu of paying it from property taxes. It's just a different income item. Did that answer your question?
Mayor,
Anybody
one
else?
question that I got posed to me a few times was that on folks that rent.
Yep.
And I know we talked about this. You want to just touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So the question, I think, is how is this fair for the folks that rent? First of all, I will admit this is probably the strongest argument against this. However, keep in mind, my goal was not to give anybody money back. My goal was to make Marion the most marketable story to tell, because we would be the 44th out of 1,293 municipalities in the state of Illinois that do not levy a tax on their property or of their citizens. That's the story that's told. It's not about whether this group of people got money and that group of people didn't, but it is the fact of the matter that if you don't own property, how are you getting any relief, quote unquote, if it's presented that way from this? Well, they're not. There are some arguments, however, that I would like to bring up, or at least some points. One, is it fair that only property owners pay for all the services in the city? Isn't that the premise of the question? Why would renters, in theory, not pay for services in the city? That's one argument. So maybe it's fairer that everybody that consumes things pays the same kind of sales tax and that everybody kind of pays. That's one argument. The other one is, however, is that the landlords who own the property that they rent certainly are getting some relief. So perhaps that leads, this is a little bit of theory, I can't promise it. Perhaps that leads to investment in the rental properties a little bit more. Maybe it helps them keep their rent down longer. I don't know. But it's the most that I've seen, it's the most valid argument against this. And that is about a third of our, I said there was about 9,000 homes in Marion, about 3,000 of them are rentals. So it does affect a lot of people. But again, my intent wasn't necessarily to see property tax relief. My intent was to be able to market our town as the place to go take your jobs and bring your family because there wasn't a property tax. The outcome of that is that you have property tax relief.
Good so far.
Okay, I really have to rest my voice for a second, so I need somebody to ask a question. Yes, sir.
There's someone there that also is ready
Okay. You guys want to wrestle for it?
to. No.
Go ahead. First thing, we are landlords, and we have not increased our rents on our current tenants in probably 10 years. But what that means is every time property taxes go up, we take the hit. Insurance goes up, we take the hit, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we're not like rolling in dough off of $100 off of property taxes. However, what it does help do is it doesn't put us, because we were actually contemplating, you know what, we may have to raise our rents because we haven't did it in so long, because we never know what our tax bill is gonna be. It's always, it's a crapshoot. You open up, you go, holy crap. Another thing, we pay more property taxes as landlords than homeowners do. We're at a different rate, because it's not owner occupied.
Oh, because of the
We have everything
exemptions,
else.
yeah.
So we already pay a higher
that's
amount as it is. The other thing is I would hope that the city would take some of this money and put it into sewers and sidewalks, because you wanna talk about beautification, nobody should have to mow their sidewalk.
I agree.
mean, and that just is atrocious. Every property you go out, we've been on a list for sidewalks for 15 years almost, and they've still never been replaced, because you have to mow your sidewalks. And, you know, when you're going down by the school on Boulevard, all those sidewalks are all beat up. But, you know, and it looks tacky. Maybe we could get trash service for everybody. Put it with the water bill, and that way everybody would have trash service. Every other city does it. Christopher, for gosh sakes. Johnson City, Carterville, Heron, and we don't. So I can put in my lease that my tenants have to have trash service, but I can't ask to see their trash bill every time I go get rent, and I'm on the property once a month. They could still stash in the shed, which has happened. You get roaches, bugs, mice, because they don't have trash service. Because they don't have to have it. But if it's with the water bill, I think it would help a lot of people to keep their yards cleaner if they have the trash can out there. Just a thought.
Okay.
Mayor Absher, members of the city council, my name is Ron Dietrich, I'm the Realtor Discovery Credit Director. And a couple questions, comments. So first off, comments, I appreciate the bulk plan because I think one of our largest concerns from our members in terms of the region is property taxes. The fact that you're looking to possibly abate these, would this be phased in over 3 years, or what's that time segment that you could go quarter by quarter by quarter?
Okay, so you can only make a tax rate change twice a year. It's either done by October 1st or by April 1st, which is also in this little booklet if you want to get a copy of this. So for us to receive any revenue off of this for the next year, not this fiscal year, we would have to do this by October 1st, which is why we're talking about it now. We would have to act on this at one of the September meetings. But to answer the other part of your question, is my contemplation was to do it all at once. And then the other thing is what we don't do, which is in November or early December, we have to tell the county what our tax levy is. So we would have to, this has to come first if that's going to replace the money that we then don't levy. in the fall for next summer's tax bills.
So this could be done over 18 months, correct?
The taxes,
Yes, drop.
yes, it would
Finishing
be,
that sales tax up.
it could be.
Okay. So thank you for clarifying that. So first off, again, it's a huge win for Williamson County property owners, our members, if you are able to get to this point to where the city's portion of property taxes is hopefully able to be paid. Because, as the mayor said, the largest concern in Illinois is property taxes. In comparison, the mayor mentioned a lot of this in the proposal that was based on O'Fallon. Modeling off of O'Fallon is a smart model in terms of the region because it is one of a handful of communities that is continuing to grow. O'Fallon, Marion, Monroe County, those are places that are bucking the trends in terms of population loss throughout the region. So kudos to your modeling after O'Fallon. But it's also impressive that you guys do have such a high emphasis on sales tax versus property taxes. That being said, a couple concerns, not so much concerns with questions, and I guess we're gonna see language on this later, on the code enforcement. Those aspects, we would love to be partners in terms of, whatever committees you may form to look at what codes you're gonna look to do. Staffing needs, just long-term goals of Marion in terms of code enforcement, because, Marion is perceived, and largely, that perception is true, as a regional leader in terms of economic development, people wanting to be in this community versus other municipalities. I have seen from my experience in the Metro East that there are municipalities that that go too heavy-handed on code enforcement. So I appreciate your comments earlier to that. We want, our members of the Egyptian Board of Realtors want to ensure that Marion continues to be that hub, property transactions continue to happen. But with that, with the potential increase for sales taxes, would there be a forecast in terms of potential revenues that could be lost just based on people that are buying less fuel in town? Because by hook or crook, the price of unleaded went up by 23 cents a gallon. The price of diesel, I think, went up by 42 cents a gallon. That means there are less people purchasing those items in our region that are going across the state lines. Would this have a negative impact? Not necessarily in revenues, but just raw gallons of fuel that are purchased. And will there be an equilibrium in terms of city finances? Because as one of the commissioners previously asked, police and fire pensions are a heavy burden on your municipality. Those benefits are likely not to be diminished anytime soon because of Supreme Court ruling. But is there enough forecasting ahead so that way Marion is not going to go the way of a number of other municipalities? In fact, a couple in Williamson County just in the past year that have had to increase their city portion of property taxes to cover those police and fire pensions. So that would be some of our kind of long-term concerns because we wouldn't want property taxes on the city portion, and have to come back in 3 years because heaven forbid, the state says, okay, Marion, you've got to increase exponentially your contribution to downstate police and fire. So I'd appreciate, if you're able to answer some of those concerns, and if not,
I could comment. I don't know that I can answer your question. As far as the forecasting goes, it depends who you're asking for the forecast. I do not know of any data that somebody in a town as small as Marion is going to be able to slice and dice that stuff and go, okay, your revenues are going to do X because you did Y. I think, is there a sensitivity there? Yes, and that's why I looked at some of these other towns to see what had happened in their sales tax scenario. Is that a predictor of our results? No, I don't think I could spin it that way and be honest. I don't know. Who does know the future? The one thing I will say about this is that if this is totally jacked up and I'm totally wrong, we reverse it. We can always go back to taxing property and lower the sales tax rate. We won't be able to do this stuff. There's no question. We can always do what we're doing right now. We're always going to get what we've got right now. To some of you, that's really good. To some of you, that's not. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it could be undone just as easily. easily and hard as it's done. You got to follow the same time cycles to undo it as you did it. In other words, we would have 1 year that we'd have no property tax and higher sales taxes, and if it all goes crazy and everything is bad, then we just undo it. You impeach me, and then I'm done because I was wrong. It's not like there's something that is irreversible. I don't know if that provides you any comfort or not, but it is an option if it's wrong. What was the other question you asked? I thought I had 3, and it slipped. Oh, I wanted another comment. Interestingly, since you mentioned those towns, we benchmarked in detail 2 towns on code enforcement. Went there, O'Fallon and Highland, just so that you know that, because they also have impressive code enforcement apparatus.
Well, and I've worked with both municipalities on their code enforcement, so, in fact, actually, Highland is kind of doing a little bit of reversal in terms of some of their code enforcement, not necessarily lowering standards per se, but, trying to make themselves even more remarkable in terms of filters. But again, thank you for, examining scaling back property taxes because, you're doing the complete opposite of most other municipalities. So that's kind of refreshing from that point. So thank you.
And I want to say this before I forget to say it, because we need to have a meeting like this at some point in the future for all of us. We need to drop it probably after this because it could go on and on. This code enforcement conversation, when you talked about some people are ratcheting it, some people are loosening it. Guys, we have got to have a conversation together about what we are and what we're not going to do. And then we got to do it. We got all this stuff on the books, no resources in order to actually enforce it. Everybody thinks we're doing one thing. We're not. They're yelling at me, they're yelling at you guys, and there's not, we have got to decide as a community, and I think the realtors need to be involved in it. I think the landlords need to be involved in it. I think renters need to be involved in it, and I think just regular people like me that has a house needs to be involved in it. What are we going to demand from our neighbors? What do we want our neighborhoods to look like? And then we don't need to look back, because once we establish those standards, then that's it. But we need to have, instead of all these piecemeal laws that have gotten on the books one after another, and we've got something like 5 ordinances that deal with nuisances, okay? I can't even find what all of them say, and I've tried. We got to get all that stuff together, understandable, and then we got to live by it. And we're going to need your input when that time comes to it, because once it is enacted, we need to be sure that we enforce it, or we shouldn't enact it in the first place. But anyway, what other question? I don't want to get back onto code enforcement too hard, but yes, sir.
I think earlier you was talking about Area 3 or whatever you was talking about.
About what? My third?
Area 3 or Group 3 or whatever, having the uniform police officers
Yes.
in the schools.
Yes.
And you said the remaining 6 schools.
Yes.
That applies to the already have it in some of the schools.
We have one. We have one officer currently, and we started that last year at the high school. So that leaves 6 buildings in the district that do not have an officer assigned to them.
I just wanted to say I applaud the council for trying to think ahead, with the upcoming tip expiring and everything else. I guess I'm here wearing 2 hats. One as the treasurer and county treasurer, and one as the park district president. But I've actually got bills if I can give each one of the council members just
Okay.
specifics just so I can show you. This is just just as an educational tool only. All I do is calculate the rates and from what everybody levies and pass that out. But I just wanted to ask the council to make sure if you can educate the public as much as possible. Because, for example, I give you 3 bills. In full disclosure, you can pull up any tax bill of any homeowner throughout the county. I've actually given you my own, so you can see that. But just in mine alone, if you'll see, the bottom 3 actually have Marion referenced in 3 different areas. There's the Marion Park District, Marion, which would be the city of Marion, and then Marion District Unit 2. So if you can explain to the people, if you are gonna provide the property tax relief, that that's gonna come from the Marion line only. The Marion Park District, which is its own taxing body, will still be levying a tax, as well as the Marion School District, which is its own taxing body, will also still be levying its own tax. So you will receive the relief, from the city, but not necessarily from, those other two tax bodies. The other two that I have is just the fact, and again, Mary, you're correct, don't go into TIF, don't explain it, whenever my office goes through and calculates the rates, we get everybody's levy, you calculate the rates, and you start to print the bills, and then you actually add the TIF in after the fact. So the percentages are broken out a little bit different. You are gonna see relief, obviously, from, that line, but if you notice on the two bills that you have, just in those particular instances, and again, this is just for reference only, and that you can see, but, this one particular one, the city receives $21.90. And then the other particular one, just in that instance, the city receives 60 cents. Again, that's from an expiring tip that's coming out here in a couple of years, and then one that's established that's got several years left, before expiration. So, only reason why I gave you that is just as an educational tool. If you would please make sure that you educate the public whenever you're doing this and going through the division to make sure that they do understand that there are other rates that are out there that they will see on their tax bill that are not associated with, the city of Marion.
Right. So you guys aren't seeing this, but basically on these examples, there's 3 Marions on there. Marion District, Unit 2, which is the school district, Marion, which is actually City of Marion, and Marion Park District. We're only talking about one of those. That's the City of Marion. I think that's one of the issues that Ashley is speaking to. So if I could waive all of them away, I would too, but I can't do that. What other questions?
Mayor, I got some thoughts.
Yes, sir.
I got some concerns. I understand and applaud this thought. But then, this 0.75%, is it based on actual sales revenue that is right now, or anticipated sales revenue?
Based on-
That's based currently.
Based on this current year, based on the last data that we've got, and annualizing that.
Okay. And then, because that's, we all know how that goes. That's anticipated.
Right.
We hope it grows, but we don't know that it grows. And, you talked about home rule tax. I know that when I left office, it was down considerably. We don't know why. We think it was, reduced car sales and,
Well, the car sales don't apply to, that couldn't have been the home rule.
well, you're right, I take that back, but, we just, and it was down and we didn't know why, we couldn't put a finger to it. But, then I caution the property tax and the funding of fire and police pensions. The actuary doesn't come out till October?
No, we've got it.
Do you have it already?
Well, we have our private, the state will come out,
Yeah.
probably, late October.
Okay, so those monies are available by this year's taxes. We don't know what's gonna happen. China just imposed 15% tariffs effective September 1st on anything from clothing to food, electronics. Obviously, that's gonna be passed down to the consumer. And then that 0.75% sales to our businesses, their price goes up for buying product, and it gets put to the consumer at some point in time. So I just wish this council would be cautious and very cautious. Maybe see what happens with sales tax increase and then reduce property tax. I would hate to see the city do away with it totally and then have to come back and impose this tower up here, you know, you guys may be the next hanging since Charlie Burke. But, you know.
Gosh, that's a terrible analogy.
But,
So,
you know,
so that I understand, you're suggesting that we not abate the property taxes at first?
At first, see what revenue.
Now you are trying to get me impeached.
No,
Yeah.
no, see what actually, because this is a great vision. I love it. It's a great vision, but it doesn't mean it has to be all, and I think that's what Rob was asking about. It doesn't have to all be done at once.
Mhm.
So, I guess what I'm saying in short is, let's see what happens, what we actually take in, and then back up the property tax from what actually occurs. So,
I understand.
keep it this year. Next year, maybe we reduce it half, and able to reduce it half, because, you know, we know in just a few short years, TIF 1 expires. That's gonna be an influx of money into not only the city, but the school district on property taxes, stuff like that. Our bond obligations to the ball, thank God, goes away in September of 2021. That's probably $1.5 million, and SSA another $360 in January 2022. I know I'm speaking Greek to you people. Mike understands, but that's money that's going to be available to this city to do sidewalks and improve sewers. Guys, we could spend, well, let's see Brent over there, we could spend $20 million in our sewers right now alone, in upgrades. But then where does that money go? You know, somebody's got to pay for it. You know, and it goes right back to the residents. So I guess I'm saying just be cautious and put thought into it.
Yeah.
And I know where you're coming from. I mean, it's got to be done by October 1st.
Well,
and
it-
if we're going to do the sales tax, do it. See what happens, and then, you know, abate property taxes accordingly next year.
I will say, to maybe help you on one point, and it's not to overcome what you said, because I think
Yes.
you've got good points. That you showed me the number when the home rule sales tax, I don't know if that was January's number or whatever
Yeah.
number it was, and it's like, whoa, that was out of, it has recovered incidentally.
Good.
And looks like we're tracking for about what we were last year, if that makes any difference. But you're absolutely correct. And I can't look at any of you and predict the future. And I have no idea what these tariffs might or might not do, or what the general economy might do. I mean, I know this, this is my biggest concern, to be honest with you, is the more people that get on TV saying there's going to be a recession next year, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can't keep saying, oh, it's going to be bad next year. Well, at some point, enough people have said that it just happens. But I get it. I think you're right on that.
You're right too. And look, a few years ago, we raised oil over $100 a barrel based on speculation.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and now the United States is the biggest producer of oil. So, you know, but
I understand where you're coming from. I
yeah,
really do.
But we've been, I guess, from the consumer, our state has punched us in the mouth pretty good this year.
No doubt.
fault of anybody here. And,
Excuse you.
bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you both. But, you know, just like I said, great. I think there's nobody in this room that cannot say this is not a great thought, and whoever put this together, I applaud them. It wasn't done in short order, but let's be cautious and maybe implement it a little bit at a time. Implement the sales tax.
Do you think maybe a third? I mean, like over 3 cycles? I think Ron actually said you could do it over 18 months. The problem is you can't abate property taxes in those same cycles.
I think if you're gonna do it, do the 0.75%. You're right with everybody else. And guys, it's mind-boggling because, you know, I sat where he was for a short period of time to see what this town does in sales compared Val and Belton, and we're right there with them.
Yeah, we hang with them.
Yeah, I mean, we hang with them, and I know that makes Mayor Absher a proud papa, and it made me a proud papa when I was in his position. I just ask you to be cautious.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Back behind you, Dan.
Yes, sir. Why don't
Have you had anybody look into, business owners look into the impact of this sales tax increase? I mean, it's gonna, obviously, there's gonna be more people that will then order online, will take their business that is being spent locally now. If you, like, raise their cost of doing business in Marion, that's gonna affect a lot of the businesses. And I'm just wondering what research, or have you told business owners about that?
No, I can't tell you that I have. I don't know how you would objectively find the answer to that. I mean, if I asked, you're a business owner, right?
Sure.
If I asked you, you're going to tell me, oh, it's going to affect you. I don't know how to get an objective third-party view of that necessarily.
Well, I noticed that they were referencing these, well, you know, Mount Vernon raised their rate this much in 2017. Well, everybody was up in 2017 compared to previous years. So I don't know that that's.
Well, that's not just
necessarily-
2017 data, though. Those sales are over, that chart is over several periods, including the latest one. It's not just, that's when they raise their sales tax, but I think that chart is actually over several
They were saying
periods.
their sales since they raised their tax have gone up. And what I'm saying is, of course, they've gone up because 16 and before, you had Obama economy, and now you've got more of a growing economy. I think we're kind of fooling ourselves if we think we can just add another penny onto the sales tax and nobody notices. I mean, that's going to, those of us who do business here locally, that's going to affect. I mean, I can tell you as somebody that operates a business, you know, I hear every day about, oh, there's no sales tax online, and there's, well, you're just making that argument harder, you know.
Well, first of all, the law just changed and is changing, and they will have to collect the same sales tax online that they're currently not collecting, basically. That law was just passed, so I think that issue mitigates itself a little bit. What is your average transaction in your shop, dollar-wise, do you think?
Probably about $85 to $95, somewhere in that.
Okay, so, you know, at 80, I don't know what the exact math is, you're talking about somewhere around 67 or 68 cents on that $85 transaction. Yeah, at 75 basis point. I don't have an answer for you. I do want to ask you guys to consider this. This isn't an objective answer, but this is one thing I have done methodically. And I want to ask you guys this sort of as a comparison point. And when I bring this town up, don't play this on the news. This is not what, I'm not trying to pick on somebody. I'm just, because that's what our shopping patterns have been in the past. Is there, by show of hands, has anybody ever shopped any of these institutions? If so, raise your hand. Kohl's in Carbondale, Hobby Lobby, what's Dick's Sporting Goods over there, Shoe Carnival. Now, keep your hand up if you've ever spent $100 over there at either collectively between. Now, same hands. How many of you can tell me within 50 cents how much you paid the city of Carbondale?
None.
Any hands left? My point is this. I do think there's a sensitivity to it, and I'm not trying to dismiss it. I don't know that that is what enters people's minds exactly on what makes their decision on whether they go there to buy it or not. I get what you're saying. I don't want to charge people any more sales tax. I don't want to pay any more sales tax. But I don't think, as I've asked this question literally dozens of times, dozens and dozens of times. I have not found one person that could remember a purchase at any one of those stores that could tell me, and here's the kicker, they'll still be higher than we are.
Reciprocally, can you ask any of these council members to remember a time when we've lowered or gotten rid of a tax that we had voted into place, that we voluntarily gave that money back to the taxpayers?
You hear the question?
Because I don't know that we've ever stopped taxing once we get the tax in and get the money.
I think at one time we, and Anthony might be able to help me on this, didn't we abate some county taxes, city taxes of our property taxes, and then turn around and had to take it back because we had a shortfall? And I'm not,
It was hotel tax.
no, it was part of the property tax.
Remember we had a sunset provision on hotel tax, and we had increase it from 10% to 11% on a hotel room, and you know, I know Mayor Butler was upset over that, but reality is, you increase on $100 room, you increased it $1, or and even at 0.75% on $100. So, you know, purchase, are you gonna quit going to Kohl's or that for $1?
Well,
Or 75 cents, you go waste more in money, you go waste more in gas.
yeah, I guess to answer your question, Dan, no, I can't think of it when, as long as I've been here, which has been, what, 5, 6 years? No, you're right, I can't. And typically, government doesn't,
Find a use for
doesn't give back anything. I get that, 100%.
Well,
But
now-
I think-
now let's be fair too. You know, government is a business, and the cost of the business goes up. I mean, it's not free.
True.
And that's a
True.
misconception that's filtering through this country. Government should be free, and it's not. I can tell you that, in Grant Can, just a few years ago, the EPA come down and said, no more lead in the ground, you know, fitting stuff like that. All of a sudden, the price of brass goes up 40% the next day. You know, that hadn't been figured into the budget. So that's what we deal with in a municipality. You don't have a lot of say in what goes on. It's just handed to you, and you deal with it from there. Mayor, I'm sorry.
That's it. No, I appreciate your input. Is there a question over here? I know I didn't answer your question. I don't have that answer. And I think what you're speaking to, if I'm reading between the lines, is you don't trust us to give the money back once, based on, and I get, you know what? I don't know that I trust us either.
I would caution you to maybe bring some businessmen in with these conversations, and it's not, the people you're talking to, it's all abstract. And so my point is once you start this tax, you can say, well, we'll discontinue it if it's not working right. That won't happen. That won't happen. Governments don't give back money. They find a
I'm
use
trying
for
to give
money.
back $1.8 million with this proposal. That's exactly what we're doing.
Well, I'll believe it when the money hits the wallet, but what I'm saying is my experience with government is once that money's coming in, we find a use for it.
If I did what you're talking about, I would just raise the sales tax and do all this stuff and not give any of the property tax relief.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I don't blame you for a second for not believing us, but that's not what this proposal shows at all. What, it's not.
It's just disturbing that nobody has even thought of or has done any research to find out what the negative economic impact would be on businesses. That's my only point, is somebody should have looked at that element when we're weighing all of this out. That's an important component to this.
Sure. But you got to weigh in the economic benefit to those same companies with the property tax.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. But there's going to be a cost to this for businesses here in town. I can
Okay.
tell you that.
You had another question? Somebody did.
My husband, we buy a lot of stuff at Menards, a lot of stuff for the houses. My husband will still be on a first name basis. He's not gonna go somewhere else with the property taxes up. I mean, the sales tax is up a little tiny bit. He's not gonna quit buying 2x4s or roofing shingles or whatever. I mean, it's all necessities that we have to have. And that's not gonna affect our shopping habits because we have to have it. I mean, we still go out to eat all the time because we live outside of Marion, in Marion almost every single day for lunch. We're still gonna do that. We're not gonna quiver about, an extra 2 cents at Fazoli's.
Yeah. And Dan, I don't mean to present in any way that I think there's no negatives to this. Don't take me that way. My senior year in high school, my band teacher, Guy Kammerer, if any of those you remember Guy Kammerer, the short time he was here, taught me an important lesson that everything in life is a trade-off. You trade one thing for another, that nothing really ever moves. To some extent, that's what we're talking about here. Is it a gamble? I don't think it's a gamble, because I have to go back, although it's not academic, and no, did I get some professors to do some study? No, I didn't. But I don't think, that's why I asked you about your average transaction size. If you've got to spend $100 before it costs you 75 cents. And you have to do that a whole bunch to make up for the money you're getting back in property taxes. Here's what this all boils down to. And if you air this on the news, you're going to really make me hated everywhere else, especially so I'm going to be hated in Marion and outside of Marion. Here's what my research does show. Somewhere north of 65% of the sales taxes that are paid to the city of Marion are paid by those that don't have a 62959 zip code. Okay? And that, guess what? Not all the people that have a 62959 zip code pay city taxes. Think of the Lake of Egypt. Think of east of town, north of town. There's a lot of Marion's geographically pretty small relative to the 62959 population. What does that imply? What does it? Who pays our property taxes? What percent of the people that live in Marion pay our property taxes? This is an easy one. It starts with 100. It ends with percent. Do you see my point? Is that fair? Not to the people that live outside of here. Is it fairer to the people that live inside and actually pay taxes for those services to the city? I think it is. Is it maybe being hoggish in some ways? I guess you could make that argument. We're leaning on those that are outside of here. But what you will do, if you'll just Google this and look at the towns that have abandoned property taxes in lieu of additional sales taxes, you're going to find success story after success story. And they've never looked back, ever looked back. I promised you as a part of the campaign that I would model, and to be honest with you, that I would copy other places that have been successful with other concepts. I don't pretend to you that I've invented this out of my own head. I didn't. This comes from other places that have used it as a model. It's not perfect, and it is a trade-off. It may not work. It might be a disaster. I can't promise it otherwise. I can't promise that the world doesn't fall down and that pension costs don't double and that we won't have to levy a property tax. And don't ever believe any elected official that can tell you that ever and never are not words that they should have in their vernacular. Can't be. Because as my esteemed predecessor Anthony said, and rightly so, you just don't know what happens to you. And it could be something far more onerous than gas prices. It could be these pension costs. Marion's in decent shape when it comes to its pensions, but we're not out of the woods by any stretch. It's just a different way of funding our city services. And if this works, we feed through these incentives and getting other people here that bring those jobs and retail, it feeds the thing that feeds you. It's a virtuous cycle, not a vicious cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. You build up the sales tax base that funds the city services that you want, and it builds on each other. I'd like to build it up to a point where we don't have to have property taxes, and maybe we can lower the sales tax rate back down. But we need to get north of $1 billion plus sales and be able to do something like that. We're not too far away. I just won't promise it to you. Who else has got a question, comment, suggestion? Tomato. Throw a tomato.
Mayor Absher.
Yes.
I'll just say that if sales tax goes up 0.75%, I'm still going to go to Kroger. Well, although groceries aren't covered, I will still go to the shoe stores and buy my shoes. It's where I live. It's where I work. It's where I'm going to be going. It would not make economical sense for me to go drive to Benton or West Frankfort, someone that has a lower tax, to save $1 or $2. It just wouldn't make sense.
My grandpa used to drive to Benton to save a penny on a gallon of gasoline. So there are those that do. That's a true story, isn't it, David? Absolutely. Never understood it then either. But he did. Other questions? Okay, if that didn't, do you guys have questions? Do you want me to go through some more of this? Do you get the gist of it? Do you understand what I'm proposing? We will eventually, if we do, whether it's what Anthony suggested or whether we do all of it, we will have to get this on the agenda. So you guys need to speak with me one-on-one as to what your concerns and wishes are. I'm not trying to shove this down anybody's throat. You guys set the agenda. This is the plan to achieve it in my mind. Okay, I'm going to throw one other thing at you. I really struggled. I didn't know how this would go and whether I'd end up with a bloody nose by the end of the night or not. And so I really didn't know whether I should do this. Cody says I should just rip the Band-Aid off. So that's what I'm going to do. This is, one of the reasons I struggle to do this is has nothing to do with everything we just talked about. But it could be confused. So I want you to just put up a little firewall in your mind. I'm not talking about any of the stuff, and we could do this without doing the other. If you got, how many of you have listened to or been to a city council meeting since April or so? Some of you. Whether you recall or not, and Anthony, I haven't talked to you about that, I have really struggled with the gambling part of what's going on in town. I want to tell you some statistics behind it. And I've really struggled with how to make the best of it, to tell you the truth. And talk about the state giving us a pop in the mouth. This is, some wouldn't look at it this way. The state just did two things that'll take effect, I think, January 1st. Every establishment that currently is limited with 5 gaming terminals can now have 6. Truck stops that have 5 can now have 10, and the bet doubles from $2 to $4, and the jackpot goes to $10,000 if I'm not mistaken. And I don't. What is the jackpot limit now?
Mike, I wanna stress to everybody, people, you need to listen to these numbers. Listen to these numbers. Go ahead.
And I also, before I go on my little rant here, I want to tell you, I do not blame the people that have these machines in their establishment one little bit. That's not what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, I've had several conversations with the gambling establishment owners themselves that are worried about some of the same things that I am. Let me give you one palpable example to this. For many of you that have been around for a long time, we've got several Hucks in town, and there used to be a laundromat in one of them, and it was very walkable. It was used a lot. And I'm not naive. I know that gambling machines are more profitable than a laundromat. But the fact is we don't have a laundromat, and I think we ought to have a laundromat down in that part of town. I don't know what to do to incentivize it. I don't know what to do to get it back. And I don't blame Hucks in the least. I would do the same thing if I were them. It's legal, it's profitable, and I don't blame them. What I struggle with, that's just one small example of social things that are needed that have been displaced by this. And it makes me shiver, to be honest with you, of what rent is being displaced. I mean, this money that could be going to rent or to car payments or utilities or to food, basic necessities. And that's not for me to judge. I'm just telling you it's a huge concern. Here's the numbers I want to go over with you. And then I want to tell you what I want to do, because I am so tired of wringing my hands about this and worrying about it, because there's not really anything we can do. I mean, the horse is sort of out of the barn, so to speak. It's not like we can undo it. And to be honest with you, and again, I'm not throwing stones at anybody, I had this question this week. Well, what are you doing with all the money that we get from gaming? Well, in our current budget, this is a key number. So all the money that's gambled, I don't know how it's done. I've never played one. I don't know if it's $1. How do you do it? Like a quarters, dollars, whatever you do. I guess you don't actually do this anymore. However you do that, all that money adds up. The state gets 30%, whatever's the gambling establishment, they keep. That's the winnings. That's what they call the winnings. So there's the amount that's bet, there's the amount that is spit out in winnings. The rest is what I would call is lost, what people lose, okay? Of that money that's lost, the gambling establishments per machine, they pay 30% of that amount to the state and 5% of it to the municipality. And that percentage is changing, and I can't quote the exact percentage, but in this new gambling expansion law, we get just slightly less than we used to, and the state keeps more. Go figure. Here's some of the numbers I want to tell you. Because when I tell you the other piece of this, somebody's probably going to get mad at me. I want to tell you what we can do here. Right now, there's 137 video gaming terminals in town. 137. That's over 41, I think, 39 or 41 establishments. I don't have that sheet in front of me. $48,932. This is the amount on average, and you gotta realize what averages are, folks. Some of them are gonna be way below this number, some of them are gonna be way above this number. That's how they work. So I'm not presenting, don't go off and think that every stinking machine that's out there does this, but this is the average number. This is how much they make per machine per year. Anybody that has one in our town. So if you've got 5 of them, on average, it's just under $250,000. In May and June alone, 2 months, $1.2 million was lost, one pole at a time, in Marion, Illinois. 1.2 million, 600 grand a month, 7.2 million a year. Now, this is all before they go from 5 machines to 6 machines, or 5 at the truck stops to 10, and they allow the bet to be doubled and the jackpot to go to $10,000 before all that. You have to, we don't know, you talk about actuarial numbers and who's done the research. I don't know that anybody said, here's what's gonna happen when we do this gambling expansion, but I bet you this, the state thinks it's gonna go up or they wouldn't have done it. That I would venture to bet. Now, we do get 5% of that. Right now, this is what's budgeted in the city budget for the current year, $260,000. And I'm sad to report to you, and it's no one's fault, so I'm not, you didn't throw any darts at me, and I'm not gonna throw any at Anthony or anybody else. But it's baked, I had this question, it's baked into our budget, guys. We've used that as general revenue at this point. And there's not a problem with that, that's just how we've treated it. But there's a huge expansion getting ready to come that we can't control, that will, I think, be significantly more than this. There's 2 ways that the city of Marion gets revenue off of gaming. One is the per machine license per year. This is what we charge. $100. $100. Here's my proposal. This has many fewer working, moving parts than this other thing. This is totally different. I'm going to get some people that really hate me over this, and that's okay. I propose that we change that licensing fee to $1,000. That's about the limit I think that we can go. That's $900 per machine extra. Here's what I propose that we do with it. That and everything above this 260 from this moment on, we segregate into a fund that provides things to basically the people that need it most in our community. Here's what I mean by that, where we start at it with the city. We have 3 facilities in town that are in dire need of rehabilitation, remodel, whatever you want to call it. Boynton Street Community Center, the Senior Citizen Center, and the old youth center, which we call the training center now. That facility right now is basically unusable because the air conditioning doesn't keep up and the bathrooms are terrible. I mean, terrible. Embarrassingly terrible. But it's a great facility. It can be used for lots of things. I may ask you if we can restore it to let the Boys and Girls Club, if it comes, use it. Boynton Street needs a gym. You don't need a baseball field, you need a gym. You need a multi-purpose room. And you need a bigger facility, and it needs to be updated. It's 30 years old. We have no budget for it, no plan for it. This is what we should do with this gaming revenue, in my humble opinion. If we have to have this in our town on every corner, then let's at least do something that we can all point to and say, okay, we did that. We did that for these folks. Let's at least be disciplined with it. Let's at least be methodical with it, and let's do some good with the money. We cannot put the horse back in the barn. It worries me. It's not my role to go preach to people and tell them not to use these machines and gamble their rent away. I don't think that they'd listen to me anyway. What I'm asking you guys is that if you're interested in this, I'll develop a full plan on how we can do this. I don't want to go to that length if you don't think this is a decent idea. But I'm asking you for the good of Marion, Illinois, to change this. Let's just quit baking the money into our budget. Let's do some good with it. I want to also say this, just a moment. This $900 represents, for the average establishment owner, about 2%, a little less than 2% of what their profit is for the year. So before you, and I know they're going to be mad at me, they're going to hate it. This I would say to the gambling establishment owners. They need to be proud of what they're doing in the community too. And they can point to this, and we can all just say, well, you know what? At least we got something meaningful out of this. At least it meant something. If we go the way we're going, just make the money into the budget, who knows where it goes? It just goes through attrition, and our budget grows year after year because it has to, as Anthony pointed out. And we don't really point to something tangible that was meaningful that we did with this. This worries me every day. I'm the liquor commissioner. I didn't know I was going to be the gaming commissioner too. But in effect, you have to have a liquor license in order to have gaming, and so it turns out to be my job. I start staring at these reports and my eyes bug out. I can't believe it. And it hurts me. But we're not going to change that part. I'm asking that we maximize that part, that we do something worthwhile with it. Let's be diligent about it. Be purposeful about it. And yeah, people will be mad at me over the increase in the fee. Honestly, I don't feel very sorry for them.
For clarity, can you put that number on the board that it kicked the amount Marion will get from the increase per machine? Maybe help people see.
Sure. So right now we have 100, as I don't have that report, I think there's 137. There were 142, somebody on the line, which is rare, went out.
Show that number. Give us good.
I anticipate, let me give you a different number. I anticipate when the gambling expansion takes effect, which is January 1st, that we're going to get 20% more machines just like that. So if you do that math, 140 machines, 20% of that's another 28, that's 168. We got a new truck stop coming about the same time next spring that comes along with 10 licenses. That's 178, and I would venture to say that there's a few more here and there that probably, that's the other thing that I would suggest. Also, the takeaway really for that business owner, before they think this is too onerous of a fee, let's cap those licenses at 200. It means that basically, if you want to just look at it and be intellectually honest, these machines are a license to print money. So what this means is if we cap it, we say we're going to charge you a $1,000 license fee, but after this, you're not going to have somebody across the street go into competition with you because we're not going to license it. Yes, sir.
Would there be some kind of exemption for something like a fraternal organization?
Yeah, I actually had thought about that. I think
A lot of clubs in town
the only one I think that might apply to, but you tell me if it's different. The only one I could think of is Elks, because like the VFW is not in town. That's the only. Is there somebody else that I'm not thinking of?
KC's.
The towns that we benchmark.
KCO?
Pardon me.
Knights of Columbus?
Knights of Columbus. The answer, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. The towns that I benchmark with this, I've used that word a lot. I copy a lot. I look at what other people have done. They have excluded or created a separate class for these machines for fraternal organizations, mainly because they had these way before everybody else did. They've been in it a long time. That would be your decision whether we create that separate class, but there are towns that have done that. Very good question. Now back to your point. So if you have 200 machines potentially, the change between what I'm talking about at 100 and 1,000 is $900, right? That's $180,000 a year.
I just don't visually see the number up there.
Let me just write it.
Yeah, more visually.
I'm not going to use my hand to erase this time because that's a bad idea. Here's what I actually think. Boy, you talk about guessing. This is really guessing because I have no idea how much people will gamble. I'm not. Matter of fact, I suggest that we warehouse this money for a year and make some plans for some of these facilities, figure out what we can actually do, and then once it stabilizes, I honestly think that somewhere, but new revenue in the city will be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 a year, with the change in the license fee, because there's two components. You've got the license fee, and then you've got all the wagering revenue that comes out of those machines. So more machines in theory, but we don't know that. We don't know. Here's what I'm questioning. If you've got 5 machines now and we know all these numbers, does the 6th machine that you get necessarily as profitable as the previous 5? I don't know that we know that. It would seem to me it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you got a 20% bump in your business, and that's why we need to wait and see, much like what you were suggesting on the other proposal. Maybe we just need to see what we don't know yet. What I'm asking, though, is what we do know is that these are very profitable. That's not changed. Incidentally, if those numbers aren't significant enough, based on May and June, when I looked at this, it was up 45% over the previous May and June. That's showing you what a absolute rocket ship this is on. That's just as concerning, by the way. So, yes, sir.
What stops the city from having gaming and stuff if there's that much money in it? I mean, if there's $48,000 per machine, we talk about the senior building and stuff like that. Most of the gaming.
Us having our own licenses?
Well, most of the gaming I've seen is seniors involved, you know? I mean, so what's the limitations as far as?
Yeah, forget about that 200 cap. I just said that's a great idea.
We cap it at now.
I honestly don't know.
If there's that much revenue involved, I mean.
I think we'd have to own and operate a liquor establishment to start with, because that's state law, and I don't think we have any business operating a liquor establishment. But it's a great question. I like the way you think, actually. What else? I still didn't put the math up there. Question mark I have here is how much does the wagering revenue go up because we've got all these other machines? That piece I don't know. But if wagering didn't go up any, this piece is pretty solid. Because if they're going to have a machine, they got to pay the license fee. I think we need to wait and see how this works. My envisionment would be to say, okay, we know that's solid. We can borrow $1.5 million for 10 years or whatever and use that money to pay that back. And then we can use that money to rehabilitate these public use facilities that we have in town.
Mayor, with the gambling expansion and the new truck stop, will that put us right at the 200 machines, did you
Yeah,
say?
very close.
So we'll basically.
You've got probably 10 or 15 in there to play with, maybe, but I really don't know that. It'd just take 3 establishments to eat all those up at that point. So, if any new restaurant or somebody that comes to town, and you got to understand too, we limit these licenses, it may limit some of the businesses that want to come here. That's the trade-off. Everything in life's a trade-off, right? We're giving up something too. But if we wanted to be hoggish and selfish about it, we'd put one of these on every street corner, maybe multiple ones on every street corner. I don't think that's in the best interests of the town, however. Yes, sir.
I don't remember the last time the choir and I went to a gambling place, but just want to make sure that we don't demonize a business.
Absolutely.
Because, business is in place to make funds. Now, I and my sisters here are pretty excited about what you're talking about for Wood Street and for the other centers. But I just want to make sure as we do that we not demonize.
I think that's a great point. I was trying to make that clear before, but I agree with you. I would do the very same thing if I owned these business establishments. I'm not faulting them. What I'm saying is, as a city that has to be a steward of this money, I'm saying there's no question, I don't think in most people's mind, this is a vice tax, right? That's as old as vices. That was the second thing that happened after the vice, is somebody figured out, some politician, how to tax it in ancient Rome. So all I'm saying is, what I think, the only criticism I have is actually of ourselves, is that let's recognize what it is. It's like the Serenity Prayer, right? Recognize what you can change, what you can't change, and then make the most out of it.
I guess that's where I'm saying is that this is something that is in many ways out of our hands.
It is.
And we're taking part of it and putting it back in our hands. I like that a lot.
I think we take control over it, and then we have something tangible. Because I know you guys represent Boynton Street. I'm glad you're here, by the way. Glad to see that. I'm going to tell you something just straightforward. 10 years from now, it's going to look exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
We have no budget to do anything with that. And outside of increasing property taxes or something, it ain't going to happen. It's just not. That's the truth. We need a couple $100,000 worth of updating to that Marion Youth Center. We're all scratching our head going, gosh, what's the worth of doing that? I'll tell you what the worth of doing that is. It's an 11,000 square foot building that's an open place that a lot of people like dancing in, but you can't go to the bathroom in. Well, that's absurd. We couldn't build that building for a fraction of what it would take. I mean, we're talking about a fraction of the money that it would take to build that building, to just repair it and make it good for the next 20 years. But it's going to take an investment. I think this is the method that we can use if we're just methodical about it. If you're the business owner and you got 5 machines, all of a sudden you got to pay $4,500 for what you used to pay 500, I think that stinks. I think they're going to be mad at me, and I think I can look at them straight in the eye and say, but look what you did. Look what good came out of this. Isn't that what we should be doing with all tax money at the end of the day? Is figuring out how to put it to the best use for the greatest number of people. That's the equation. How we get it, whether it's sales tax, property tax, or any other kind of tax, really it's what people ultimately care about is what'd you do with it. Did you waste it? Did you do something worthwhile with it? That's what I'm asking you for. At least we can be proud of what we did with it.
The language as to how you approach this, how you all approach this, is what you just said at the end, is that let's put them into action.
Yeah.
A positive action.
You can write my speeches for me, John.
Well, I'm just saying is that we can easily turn this in and not be careful about language. And then we set aside a certain group of people in society that just wanted to make some money.
Right.
Fast money.
And I don't think of them that way at all. So I think you're right. We have to be. I have to be, and we have to be very careful how it's presented.
Yeah. I don't like what they do, but it's not that I don't like them.
I need some input on this, guys, on this gambling. Does anybody disagree with this at heart? Think this is just totally the wrong way to go? Because I'm going to get some heat over it. They're going to get some heat over it. We have to stand and make sure, that they understand what this is all about. It's not trying to penalize one person or the other. Quite to the contrary. I hope they make a whole bunch of money at that point, because if it's going to go back to this, at least we know we did good with it. But right now I feel guilty about it.
My thought is they'll probably take that sixth machine to offset the cost of the increase of the license, which, here we go, we're trading again.
It's a trade-off. But they will make more than what this extra fee costs them. I mean, there's no.
Well, you're doubling the bets.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just conceivable that, yes, they are gonna make more.
Yeah.
And might as well take what we can.
What do you guys think? Is this something you want me to work up in more detail? I mean, it's not hard to pass the
Absolutely.
the thing that says it's. This
all-
comes up in January, by the way. That's when all these. I think. Is that right, Tammy? January, when all these licenses renew. So we have to do it before then. There's no impetus to do it this month versus next or anything. But if we're going to do it, we obviously need to communicate with the business owners to let them know this is coming and why. What exactly is it going to be used for? But
I think all of what we talked about tonight is basically a calculated risk on the city's part. And at this point, after talking with Mike as much as I have over the last couple weeks about this, and looking at the broader picture, it's a safe risk for us. Is it going to make some people mad? Sure it is. Is it going to help the majority of the people? Yes, it will. And honestly, when I ran for this office and I was elected, my goal was to make Marion the best that it possibly could be. And however we get there is what we need to figure out. And that's what all of us ought to be thinking about. This place the city of Marion needs to be the premier location in the state of Illinois that people flock to. And this is just the beginning, I think, of what is going to happen in the future, because we have a forward-thinking mayor that has these ideas and presents them in such a way that, really, folks, it's pretty simple. Really, it is. To me, it's a calculated risk, and it's a very safe calculated risk. It may backfire on us, but I'm willing to take that risk.
you're talking more about the sales tax proposal.
I'm talking about
all of it.
everything. I really like the idea of taking the money and squirreling it away to see what happens, and then, by golly, let's do something good with it. That, to me, is so refreshing.
It would take us a year to figure out what all these
It will.
facilities exactly. We need to talk to them, figure out what it needs to look like,
Exactly.
what the budget might be, how we can. It's going to take some time to get there anyway.
And Dan, I appreciate your point in that we need to check with area businesses, business owners, and see what kind of an effect this may have on them or will have on them. And again, it boils down to a calculated risk. Am I going to make that person go to Carbondale? Or am I going to make that person go to Mount Vernon? That's the question we have to ask, and that's what we have to calculate. What's the risk here? Is the reward much greater than the risk? Or is the risk much greater than the reward?
Just to be clear, in both of your examples, they would still be more expensive going to those towns. Their tax rate's still higher than this one. You have to pick
Absolutely.
I mean, Aaron would be our competitor, really.
Yeah.
That's what we would end up with.
Even if we raised it 0.75%, we're still gonna be below Carbondale, we're still gonna be below Mount Vernon, and we're still gonna be below probably most other towns around here, with the exception of maybe one or two.
Paducah is close. That's one thing to consider.
Say it again?
Paducah is close. That's one thing to consider.
Yeah, Paducah.
It is.
It's a valid
Yep,
point.
valid point.
6% there.
Cape Girardeau's another one. Cape Girardeau, hey, that's only an hour away. I'd drive an hour to buy save $50 on a pair of tennis shoes. Might not go there to save a penny on a gallon of gas, but
38 cents on diesel fuel.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
As you guys think through this, and you know that they're thinking through this, like I said at the beginning, all I really want to ask and make sure, do the actual math before you make a judgment on it. I don't think it's nearly as onerous as what some people would make it out to be. I don't like messing with this at all. Obviously, it's a sensitive topic. If I didn't think that this was better for us all on average, I wouldn't propose it in the first place. I may be naive. I don't think I'm stupid. I don't want to do something that makes it bad for everybody at all. But just do the actual math. Go through the like you said, if you've got an $85 actual transaction, just get a reaction. Quote somebody the new sales tax rate and then tell them later, oh, I made a mistake, it's 7 or 8 cents cheaper or 75 cents cheaper or whatever. See if you get a rise out of it. I don't know how to actually objectively find out what the reaction from the consumer might be. Maybe there's some resources to do that.
Businesses are gonna have different outcomes. Somebody
Sure.
over here mentioned, well, I'm always gonna go to the shoe store to get my shoes. Well, when you sell items that are not necessities, if you're selling
Sure.
luxury items, that you're impacted differently by all of this. And so my 2 cents is just, I would consult as many people as possible to make these decisions. Because like Carbondale, once we start pulling the trigger on raising a tax here, getting more incremental financing here, instead of cutting, I haven't heard anything getting cut. But when we start pulling these triggers, they never go backwards.
Yeah, I understand.
You never get that money back. So my question is,
I understand. I understand exactly where you're coming from. Okay, any other questions on this or the other proposal at all? Anything at all? Going once? Going twice? Anything else to come before the council? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Patton.
Yay.
Commissioner Barwick.
Yay.
Commissioner Webb.
Yay.
Commissioner Steckland.
Yay.
Mayor Absher.
Yay. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.